Hi, I'm Steve Downing. I'm the showrunner on the first 7 years of the real MacGyver. And I'm joining the MacGyver podcast with Mac Jackson.
Hi, I'm Richard Dean Anderson.
Name's MacGyver.
Colonel Jack O'Neill, SG-1.
My name is Pratt, Ernest Pratt.
I always get a happy, tingly feeling when I see those guys.
Name one contract that I failed to execute.
MacGyver.
Oh, here we go.
You're a target. And I don't intend to miss.
Over my rotting corpse. I'm sorry, did I say that out loud? Glowing eyes, cliche behavior, evilness, that kind of thing.
Is mental illness contagious?
You think?
You can do anything you want to do if you put your mind. Well, you do have a penchant for pulling brilliant ideas out of your butt. Head. Out of your head when we need them. Oh, the stuff's already here. I just find a different way to use it.
I like your attitude.
Permission to take a team through the Stargate, sir.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of the MacGyver podcast. I'm your host, Mac Jackson, and I'm very proud to have producer and showrunner of The MacGyver, Stephen Downing, joining me today. And we're going to just get chatting. That does it, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So how are you?
I'm good. I'm
How you
real
doing
good.
with the whole pandemic thing?
Well, we're hunkered down here in Long Beach, California,
Yeah?
and we have been for so very many weeks.
Yeah.
But it's not bad. You learn to appreciate new things
Mm-hmm.
and greater depths to relationships and new games to play to pass the time. And I think sometimes the alcohol consumption might be just up just a tiny bit because you're able to fit in a cocktail hour every day.
I was going to say, at least you don't have to drive anywhere.
Yeah, you don't.
Well, you know,
And we live in a nice neighborhood where everybody's patio is out front,
mhm.
and there's a nice distance, and so we sit on the patio and we still have interaction with all our neighbors.
See, that's
And
nice.
last Memorial Day, we set up social distancing chairs, and we had a classical musician come in and play the violin in the middle of the street, and some little girls down the street gave us some Peruvian dancing that was just gorgeous, a 9-year-old. And we have some musicians on the street, set up a band, and we had a pretty nice day. We had a barricade we keep in somebody's backyard, and we threw it up on our one-way street to keep the cars out for a while and let all the children freely ride their bicycles, and they enjoyed that. So,
Oh, see, that's neat. You know, I was saying, for all the unfortunate stuff that happens because of this pandemic, there's the other side of it, which is just beautiful, like what you're saying, where you just,
yeah,
it rebuilds your faith in humanity.
it sure does.
Right?
It was a very special day, and in a very small way, a very special day, but very big to everybody on this block. Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're not, you know, it's an inconvenience for most of us, thank God, as opposed to a major problem. You know, like I could stay home and work from home. I don't mind, you know, there's worse things in the world. If I don't get to go to a restaurant for a while, that's all right. You know, when you think about how people had to live through wars, we're doing okay.
You bet.
So I'm dying to know, how did you go from being a police officer to being a producer?
Well, I'm a writer primarily.
Oh.
And so I was with the Los Angeles Police Department. I joined in 1960, and I was a young sergeant in 1965. when Adam 12 was invented, and I had already taken a number of graduate courses in creative writing along with my police career. But as many things in life go, when you have that interest, fate finds you. And at the time, Dragnet with Jack Webb was a big program and very closely coordinated with the Los Angeles Police Department.
That's right.
And-
Yeah, I always heard they took real cases.
Right, and they wanted to create a new show with a uniform officers. That new show became Adam 12. Well, they asked the department for one of their best to be a technical advisor. And so I took the producers out in the field for a couple of months, and then I sat with Jack Webb himself as for 3 days when he wrote the script. And I basically almost co-wrote it with him because I sat there and answered all his questions, and he'd asked if this dialogue was okay and whatnot. And so when the script was done, I said, you know, I'm interested in writing and I can do what you just did. And he said, well, Dragnet is in production. If you really think you can, most people think they can, but they really can't. But if you think you can, spec a script for Dragnet and I'll read it. I said I couldn't ask for more. So I spec'd a script, gave it to him. He called me up that night. I delivered it. I did all my writing on the weekends. And so that night he called me up and said, come on down. He said, I'm going to buy this script. And he gave me a few notes. We made second drafts, changes. And I wrote 11 of his next 22 scripts.
Wow.
And by that time, Adam 12 got off the ground. I wrote a ton of those. And then I helped them create a show called Emergency, which was about paramedics. And at the time, the executive producer on Adam 12 and the producer of Dragnet, a fellow by the name of Bob Senator, he found out about this little operation going on in the south end of LA County with the Station House 51. And what had happened is the main cardiac doctor at Harvard General Hospital had the idea that people's lives could be saved if you could get to them earlier, especially with the paddles and the IVs.
Yeah.
And so he contacted Squad 51 and talked about creating a paramedic program, and eventually they got it off the ground. Senator found out about it, and we created a pilot and a television series that became Emergency. And the interesting thing, piece of trivia for you, which I think is accurate, Emergency was launched when that was the only paramedic outfit in the country.
Yeah,
And
I think you're right.
It was that program that made people say, how come we don't have one of those in our town? And it was born. Well, from there, I continued to write for other things. I wrote for other shows, Police Story, all of the David Gerber shows, the Beat Officer, Policewoman. I wrote for Streets of San Francisco. I wrote for all the cop shows. So for 15 of my 20 years on the department, I wrote, and I think I had written by 1980 when I retired, 230 hours of primetime television.
See, that's impressive, because I love the creative process, but you also, as you know, have to pay the bills. So it's not like you got delusions of grandeur and quit your police job. you're squeezing in the writing after hours.
Well, I did the writing on weekends, and fortunately, I worked with people that always understood that I put the police department first.
Mhm.
And during those 20 years I was there, I went through the ranks. I retired as a deputy chief. My last assignment was chief of personnel and training. But I never took away from the police department to do this. I wrote on weekends, and my wife would deliver the script to the gate. She knew all the studio guards. And an interesting story is when I was a commander in the Bureau of Special Investigations, one of the units under my command was labor relations, where we would go out and deal with labor strife in the city and strikes and make sure that we were neutral and we helped everybody do it peacefully. Well, a writer's strike came along while I was writing, and if you didn't go out on the strike line, the Writers Guild, which is where I was a member,
Yeah.
they fined you $100 a day.
Sheesh.
So I just couldn't do it because it would have been a huge conflict of interest.
Oh, yeah.
So I got my wife to do it, and she walked the picket line for like 3 months, and she met all the big, really big deal writers and pitched pennies with them and played cards with them. And
Well, that
and
helps
she-
make connections too.
yeah, it was great for her. She knows to this day, she knows more people in Hollywood than I do.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, and how long would you say it would take you to do an average spec script?
Well, half-hour scripts, I could write a half-hour script, a good first draft, in a weekend. I could push that, especially the procedural stuff.
Mhm.
But when you get into deeper stuff, character and character resolution and those kinds of things, they take a little bit longer. And
Sure.
over those years, I wrote a number of television movies and miniseries as well. But then when I retired, I intended to freelance so we could travel around and take the typewriter with us. But as soon as I retired, there's another writer's strike. And my son had just graduated from USC, and he was going to sail around the world, but his first leg of the trip was to race the Transpac from Los Angeles, from Marina del Rey to Hawaii. So we went over to Hawaii to greet the race and the boats. And during that time, the Writers Guild settled the strike. And I got a call from some of the guys I used to work with on Police Story. They were doing a new show produced by Eric Berkovitzy, who was the famous producer at the time, who had just launched as a writer-producer Shogun.
Mhm.
Shogun was over, and he was picked up for 2 series at one time. One was Chicago Story, and the other was McLean's Law with James Arness.
Mm.
So they asked me if I would come on the McLean's Law show as a executive story consultant, and I did that. That show lasted a year. I wrote a spin-off pilot while I was there for MGM, and then another guy that I had worked for was starting a new series called T.J. Hooker,
T.J. Hooker, yeah.
with
William Shatner.
Bill Shatner, yeah. And so I did that show for 3 years, and then MacGyver came along. MacGyver was originally, the original script was written by a fellow by the name of Lee Zlotov,
Mm-hmm.
and Paramount had the script, and Paramount at the same time knew that Henry Winkler and John Rich had put deals because of their successes, John as a director and Henry, of course, as an actor
As the
with
Fonz, yeah.
Happy Days and all that. So they asked Henry and John to put together a production company called Winkler Rich Productions. So it was their production company that Paramount handed the MacGyver pilot script to. And they made that show, and the network loved Richard Dean Anderson. They didn't, and they loved the idea of the inventive hero. There were a lot of other elements in the pilot that they were not fond of. So I was hired, they hired a fellow by the name of Jerry, forgive my memory.
No, that's all right.
I'm growing old. Anyway, they hired a showrunner and brought me in as a supervising producer, and I did what they call a little doctor work on the pilot.
Yeah.
And we created the Phoenix Foundation and new characters and disposed of some characters that you saw in the pilot. And probably the biggest thing, because I did love the idea of this inventive guy who had a core science background that could think like that. But a lot of people don't remember this, but in the pilot,
he shoots a gun.
He shoots a gun.
But I always change this, because if you watch, he doesn't, you see where the bullet hits. And I always took it as, instead of it being like a flub, it looks like he was warning them to stay back, you know, because it shoots nowhere near anybody. So I thought,
right,
I can forgive that.
Okay, all to their own.
Yeah.
He did use a gun.
Right.
And I said to the producers, to Henry and John in the studio, I think that since we want to be a family show and want to be welcomed into every home, and the fact that we have a character that is smart enough, he knows how to avoid violence, let's make a rule he never uses a gun. And it was a lot of discussion because the network got into it and whatnot. And I kind of held to my guns, and everybody finally agreed
Thank God.
to that thought. And so he never did use a gun except once.
Right.
And that was the episode where we had the nuclear countdown going on, and he fought that guy.
Uses it as a wrench.
And he kicked the cylinder out of a revolver and used it as a wrench. Now, when you look back on that, you got to say, oh, well, you know, that's kind of obvious and whatnot. I'll tell you what, coming up with that MacGyverism was an all-nighter.
Oh, I'll tell you, nothing about that was ever obvious. It was always brilliant. And it's a way of, one of the things that MacGyver, the legacy that it teaches you, is basically how to rewire your own thinking. Don't go with the easy, oh, I could squeeze a trigger, so I'll just use a gun. No, if you think of things from a different angle, sure, now it's a wrench. You know,
Right.
I remember he did that with an Uzi too in the first episode of the 6th season. You know, he's with Shaft, Richard Roundtree, and he's saying, "What are you doing? That's an Uzi," and he puts it on the fire hydrant and says, "Well, now it's a wrench."
Yeah.
I love that, you know,
Yeah.
because if you start thinking like that, you do become an unconventional thinker.
And I think the concept, which is really a concept of de-escalation and an avoidance of violence.
Yes.
And in my last assignment, as I said, in the police department, I was chief of personnel and training. And in that job, I also served as the chair of the shooter and review board.
Mm-hmm.
And our concept on the use of force was, number one, human life is precious, and the taking of a human life should be only at a very last resort. Okay, so with a policy that says only as a very last resort, that imposes a lot of things on your thinking and your training and creating some distance. Is don't be ashamed to back off. Don't be ashamed to take cover. Don't be ashamed to call enough resources to help you control the situation without killing somebody,
Right.
without using deadly force. And I think MacGyver represented all of that. And it would be great if that concept, especially in today's news, was just accepted.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's probably one of the biggest legacies.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, besides, everybody obviously thinks of the MacGyverisms, which in and of itself is wonderful, but MacGyver was never trying to be macho. There was never an ego involved.
No.
It's about being the best person you can be, and then like ripples in a pond, try and have an effect in a positive way with the rest of the world. And for me, that's, I mean, look at me, I'm doing a podcast about them. It's because of that sort of effect that it had on me. What, this is 85. I was 10, I'll say. And right away, I just was drawn to it. And then it never let me down. It was always going to be inspirational without being preachy. At no point did I ever feel like anybody was standing on a soapbox. Somebody had written an article last year, maybe the year before, and it was about them finding acceptance within themselves. I don't know if they were gay or transgender, but the article was about how MacGyver taught them to be okay with who you are. Because MacGyver never argued with somebody to try and justify who he was. He was very comfortable in his own skin. If somebody didn't understand what he was doing, he went, that's okay, and just moved on. And it's so subtle that I think it can be overlooked, because if the average person thinks MacGyver, well, you think MacGyverism, but that's not what makes him iconic. That's what I always say. The MacGyverisms get you in the door, but it's Richard Dean Anderson that keeps you on the couch, because he is, you know, MacGyver is inspirational because of how he deals with the everyday problems.
And accessible. People like him. They want to welcome him into their homes.
Exactly. And it's not about blowing something up. It's about the one-on-one that he has with all his friends and family. You know, if they have a debate, well, you know, nobody's going to punch each other. They're going to maybe be passionate, but they still love each other.
Do you know the history of the emergence of the word MacGyverism?
The history? Well, I know it's finally in the dictionary. Thank God.
Well, it is in the dictionary. The first time I ever heard it, the first time, was the third year of the show.
Twice Stung?
Where I don't remember
they mentioned
the
it
episode.
Twice Stung, where the girl says, "Oh, you're the guy who does the MacGyverisms."
Well, it could be, but the first time I heard the word expressed, third year of the show, we were shooting in Canada our first year, and Rick, we were shooting it at what they call the watershed, I think it was called, and Rick and I were walking through a campground, trailer campground. And we're just walking through. It was, you know, day was over or whatever. And some guy was trying to get reception on a television, I don't know, with a hanger or something. And his wife said to him, use a MacGyverism, do a MacGyverism. They never saw us. And we just kind of looked at each other. Wow, this is catching on.
Was that when go ahead.
I don't know if we put that into a script that allowed her to catch on or not, but I mean, today I saw Rachel Maddow a week or so ago, but I've seen her a couple of times. she routinely uses that term.
Yeah.
We're doing a MacGyverism over here or there. It's kind of interesting.
Well, it's got to make you feel proud because you're, besides having an iconic character, the word is part of the zeitgeist. It's, you know, it'll always be known for the end of time.
Well, I'm proud of the show, and I'm proud that that it represents a depth of humanity that we really need to keep alive in this country, especially these days. We need to find ways, especially in police work, to be inventive and be creative and not be warriors, but be guardians.
Right.
Be good neighbors. Accommodate what Sir Robert Peel called the 9 principles of modern policing. And a lot of those things go into these kinds of shows.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
MacGyver.
Well, and that's the thing. You know, you put it beautifully. It's a wonderful motto to have for your life, is to be helpful and not be afraid to let your ego go. You know, you're right. And I think if I know I'm doing it with my kids, keeping their priorities straight. We watch MacGyver, you know, every week, because besides me, I've watched them a million times. Well, now I get to share that with my kids, and they are impressed and amazed, and it's having that wonderful ripple effect.
Right.
I couldn't think of a better hero. You know, there really isn't. And it's the subtlety, and I want to praise you a lot while we're talking, so forgive me, but you're responsible for keeping that quality throughout the entire series. And I've had my friend writers who have been on already, as you know, they always point to you, because I'll say, you know, the pacing, they don't do pacing like they should anymore. The pacing in MacGyver and the music score and the times when it changes to reflect the mood, they don't do that anymore. And I think it was your attention to detail and your persistence on it that makes it timeless. Not just a classic show, but I'll watch the episodes now, and at no point do I feel like it's out of place with today's world. You know, so that, you know, those little moments that people tend to take for granted, I appreciate more than I can say. Because I always say it's, you know, it's the quiet moments for me that have meant just as much. Like to have MacGyver, before anybody walks into his boathouse, he's there doing some chore, whether it's washing the dishes or whatever. And you like to see the quiet moments, because
Right.
if it's all explosions, you're not getting the humanity.
I always like to watch him smell his food before he ate it.
Yeah. Do you remember what the pilot was originally like before you came in?
Well, harking back, I remember that there was some children that were intended to be regulars, and I remember vaguely that he was sitting in something to do with a you know, what do you call it, where you look through the telescope?
Oh, sure.
Observatory. I think there was an observatory.
Yeah, in the pilot, that's where he lived.
Yeah, and and he had no real franchise in the pilot, and so we created the Phoenix Foundation as his franchise, and we created the character of Dan Alcar's character, who wasn't, he wasn't in the pilot, and then our regulars like excuse me, like Murdoch and
Sure.
and
Jack Dalton,
and Jack Dalton
Penny
and
Parker.
Penny Parker, they became kind of our regulars as a result of discovery by casting them and saying, oh, wow, there's a good chemistry there. Let's have her back for this, or Jack Dalton back for that, or Murdoch. I mean, let's bring him back from the dead even, you know.
Yeah.
And they were all delightful people to be around too.
Mhm.
And what you want is a happy crew,
Right.
and your actors, especially those that are there every day, they have a lot to do with the culture of the organization
Mhm.
and the ability to get the job done.
Mhm.
Like Rick, you know, as you know, if you get behind in a production schedule, you're in a lot of financial trouble.
Mhm.
And like we built that studio in Vancouver,
Mhm.
and we had multiple stages, and we'd be behind, and we had to do a quick move to another stage, and lots of stuff has to go over to that next stage, even though there's a set there. But Rick, he'd pick up a lamp or a chair or whatever. He had a leadership quality that he would just pitch in, and when the star pitches in, everybody else wants to do double because they don't want to disappoint him. So that's leadership, and Rick was always like that. Rick could get along, and I remember he might have a problem with a script, but he never locked himself in his dressing room.
Right.
But I remember we did that episode. We took the company up to Calgary, and we shot this Western show where
Sure.
Rick hit his head and he woke up as
Serenity
a Western
and
guy.
yeah.
Well, of course, Rick's an actor, and the day before, a couple days before, he's trying on new costumes for this, going back to the old West thing, you know, the cowboy hat. But he's sitting there and he's pasting on this handlebar mustache, and he's just loving it. He's loving it, you know. He's like that, and he said to me, you know, he said, "What do you think?" I said, "Well, I think it looks great, but this is a dream sequence. Is it reasonable that you dream that you're waking up with a mustache?" I said, "That doesn't kind of work for me, Rick." And he, "Oh, okay. And so he took it off, and I went about my thing and whatnot. And next day I saw him, he was looking at the mustache again. And I knew that as an actor and all of getting ready for that role, that was important to him.
Mhm.
But he said, okay, to me.
Sure.
He said, okay. And I saw him doing that another time, and I said, you know what? I think that might be important for you as a character. Why don't we wear it? He said, okay, that'd be good. And he loved it. And when he went in and played that Western guy, look at that episode again. You can tell.
Oh yeah.
Because he's playing himself, but he's playing, you know, a character in the Old West.
Yeah.
And I think he was tickled pink, and he just enjoyed it, you know. But that's the kind of guy he was all the time. He was always a joy to be around, and a joy to work with, and a collaborator. You know, I think the world of him.
And insanely humble. Like, one of the
Yes,
best
he is.
qualities that I love about him is I find out through the years, all these other, like you're telling me these great stories that he would never tell himself. You know, I've gotten to meet him in person a couple times so far. I'm hoping to get him on the podcast sometime. But when he's talking to you, and I've watched him with other people, he's focused on who he's talking to. And he's
Right.
always sweet and always patient and always kind. And, you know, to hear these stories, you go, I'm glad to be supporting a good person, you know?
Yeah.
It makes a difference because a lot of times you find out the hero that you thought in real life
Right.
may not live up to what you thought.
Right.
And in his case, he just keeps impressing me.
And he had great chemistry with those regulars that,
Who, by the way, are also phenomenal. Bruce
Yeah,
McGill. Bruce McGill, you know, I of course knew him as Jack Dalton, but if I catch him on anything else, he could play a bad guy so naturally.
yeah.
You know, and then you see him in person and he's such a lovable goof.
Yeah, he's a great guy, and he loved, especially coming up to Canada. He is a dyed-in-the-wool golfer, and you know the regulars, the semi-regulars, they get a couple of days off during the shoot, and he'd be heading for the golf course. He met his wife on the set.
Oh,
She was
really?
Yeah, she was a first assistant director, Gloria,
Huh.
and he secretly dated her for some time, and then one day he announced they were married, and I just traded emails with him a couple of weeks ago, and they're living here in the LA area and hunkered down for this
Sure.
coronavirus. But he was just terrific. My favorite episode with Rick and Jack Dalton was the baby episode where they were changing the diaper.
Rock the cradle. Yeah.
Yeah, it was hilarious. A fellow by the name of John Walkley wrote that episode, and the dialogue between those two guys, it just sung.
Oh yeah. Well, right from the beginning where they're in the plane, and the plane and he can't get the landing gear, and
Right.
you know, that's only the first 5 minutes, but I'll tell you, it's that clip alone is as epic as the rest of the episode. You feel like there's certain episodes where you feel you got a couple episodes in one, and that's one of them. The other one is the avalanche, where
Right.
you know, with the ski. That first half hour could have been the whole thing, and you would have went, "That's great," but then you have another half hour to go.
Right.
You know,
And the parachute through the ski pole, that was one of my favorites too.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it really showed the love between Pete and MacGyver. Like, MacGyver is freezing. Yes, he's saving himself, but Pete's right there to help too. And then in the end, he's hugging him, you know, and MacGyver's shaking, and you just felt that love.
All right.
You know, it's those moments that really make a difference.
There was also the episode where Pete told MacGyver that he was losing his sight.
Mm-hmm.
And that, in fact, was true, that Dana was losing his sight. And the studio knew it. And there were questions about his ability to continue with the show because he was losing his sight, and he would need that kind of assistance. And the studio started talking, ending his contract. And I said, that ain't gonna happen. Pete is going to, I talked to Dana, and I said, Pete is going to have this affliction, and it's gonna get worse, and it will get worse for Dana, and it will get worse for Pete on a parallel. So when we did the episode that he told MacGyver, in that scene, they had to stop. Rick couldn't handle it.
Yeah, there's a
broke
scene where he
down.
goes into the kitchen and starts like wiping his eyes.
Yeah, well, before that, he really couldn't handle it, and we had to reshoot it. I mean, as a human being, Richard Dean Anderson couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
He had to count to 10 to come back, and powerful scene, so real because it was between MacGyver and Pete, and it was also between Rick and Dana, and powerful moment. Powerful moment.
Well, you know, I'll tell you this too, and it goes right along with that. we did an episode on the podcast called The Showrunner's Oath. And it basically describes all that you're talking about. How everybody has to get beyond themselves and think about the end product, and how everybody has to come in as a team and think of what's the greater good, and being able to fight for each other. I think you're the beginning of my understanding of the showrunner's oath. And I think that type of wonderful mentality then spilled over into Stargate SG-1 with Michael Greenberg and Brad Wright, because they had that same type of mentality too. You know, it's hard to come by, apparently.
Well, one of the things I used to say, especially in the first couple of years in Vancouver, when we moved the show to Vancouver from Los Angeles, I left writing staff in Los Angeles, and I would end up with scripts 2 days before they had to be shot that needed major rewrites. And I'd have to fly these guys up there, or eventually I hired a couple of Canadians, Rick Drew and John Shepard, who saved my life, who allowed me to sleep at night. These guys, they were my heroes, and good writers, both of them.
Oh yeah,
Great writers. Anyway, as you probably know, writers have massive egos, and they want to fight for the written word that they produced.
Yep.
And of course, I had a different kind of job, and that was to keep the show what it was, and to advance it in the way it should be, and to fulfill what the vision of MacGyver was. So I always had a rule, and I told them, when you come into the writer's room, which was my office, and we're going to discuss scripts for the notes for the script, please check your ego at the door. And that way we'll have a good meeting. But if your ego gets in the way, that wastes a lot of time.
Well, John Constantine, who I had on, he was telling me that when he first came aboard, you know, he got the warning of, listen, save a lot of the description part of the script to the other characters, not for Rick, because Rick is in every shot. And if he has to lay pipe, as they say,
Right.
You know, and he said his first thought was, who the heck does this guy think he is? Telling me I shouldn't write too many lines for him. And then when he understood, he went, oh, I get it now. Okay. Yeah, he's in every shot.
Yeah.
And then, of course, then he met Rick and loved him.
Yeah. Well, also, I'm sure you're aware of this. In the first season, MacGyver did voiceovers.
Right.
To help explain the MacGyverism and transitions and whatnot.
Yeah.
And because he's in every shot, that means during the production day, his work day, there's no time to record the voiceovers because you have to go into a sound stage and do it. Well, we saw that we were killing them with that. It was a workload thing.
Sure.
And he never complained, but we were wearing him out. And so that's why we stopped doing voiceovers.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I can see it now, obviously, so many years later. But I'll tell you, honestly, at the time when they went away, I never noticed. Because,
I didn't either. It's a better show without them.
Right. Because, if you're forcing dialogue over the top of something, you don't want it to seem ham-fisted or whatever. And
well, another thing it forced a greater depth of photography.
Yes.
In other words, it forced you to get in there and sell the MacGyverism visually.
Yep.
Well, that too was very expensive, but when you're shooting, he can go through all of the motions of that MacGyverism, and then the real time consuming microphotography of that, if you want to call it that. We do it with second unit with a hand double. And so the company is moving on, the expensive company is moving on, but we had an insert unit that would shoot for 2 days on every episode, just making the MacGyverisms work.
Showing the hands.
With the hands, we cast hand actors.
Like his brother, I think, did a couple of those.
I don't know about that. I don't
One of the
remember that.
writers
Maybe.
was telling me, yeah.
Maybe, yeah. But it was better than voiceovers explaining everything. I think, yeah.
Well, and it also came down to, like I said, the pacing. I can watch Richard Dean Anderson get dropped off in the beginning scene off a helicopter, walk over to his car, drive somewhere, get out, and then walk up to a porch with no dialogue and still be glued to my seat. You know, because besides him being so watchable, the pacing and the music kept you grabbed. You know what I mean?
Yes, sir.
And I think too many shows, the remake, for example, skips over that. It's just run, explosion. You know, they tell you how you should feel as opposed to letting the characters make you feel.
We had a lot of good directors on MacGyver, and one of the top directors was a fellow by the name of Mike Vahar, and he'd done a lot of work on Hawaii Five-0, really lush stuff, and he was a very visual guy, and he helped establish a lot of that, the look and the pacing, and he came from the editorial ranks, so he knew about pacing, and I learned a lot from him. And John Rich, John Rich he didn't want 2 seconds to go by without, you know, keeping it moving.
Go.
Yeah. So the directors that we had and the original vision that was established in the show and that pacing was really continued by talent like that helped us deliver that great look. And I remember The Widowmaker.
Sure.
Mike Vahar directed that, and to this day, he's a neighbor of mine. He lives 2 blocks away, and to this day, he cusses at me for writing that show and having them direct it.
It's a
because
classic.
He hates heights.
Oh, geez.
They go up to the top of the Widowmaker. They fly in a helicopter and get out, and the stunt coordinator and the special effects guy who had to build all the rigging and, you know, off of the face of this, it was a Widowmaker. It was up there.
Oh, yeah,
They just walk right up to the edge, their toes hanging over the edge, having a conversation. And Mike doesn't want to get 10 feet close to the edge. And so his sphincter was tight the whole show, you know.
Yeah, that's another. Well, I mean, any Murdoch episode being his archenemy is a mega event, which another thing I love is you'd never overused him. He'd show up once and maybe twice a season, you know, during the 5th or 6th. And he was never overused, and you never knew when he was going to show up. It wasn't saved for the last episode of the season. He could just show up all of a sudden, you know, like the Cleo Rocks episode. He's in disguise through a good chunk of it.
Right. Yeah.
My son was amazed when he finally peels back the mask. He goes, "Oh, that's Murdoch." I'm like, see?
Yeah.
That's it's picking your moments also makes a big difference because it's not predictable at all. you know,
Yeah,
that's a
you
big
got it.
deal.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, the range, I was talking about the micro photography,
Yeah.
which is expensive to do, time consuming, but also the scope of the show. So you had it going from here to here,
Mhm.
uh, big scenes, big desert scenes. And I'm always reminded a fellow by the name of Paul Margolis, who was one of the Americans that came up and was on staff with us. He created a couple of just great episodes. The one with the violin,
Oh, sure.
and
Lost
then
Amadeus.
and then he did the Black Rhino show.
Hmm.
And that Black Rhino show to me was one of the highlights of the series. And it was also a highlight of stress decision making, because Paul came in and pitched me the idea of this rhino show where the rhino is found and he's down, but he's alive.
Yeah.
And I loved it, but he had to write it. But if we were going to do it, I had to order the rhino before I knew whether I had a script that worked or not.
Oh, man.
And I think that rhino was about $50,000.
And it looks
And
real.
And so we bit the bullet, and that rhino was under construction while the script was under construction. And it all worked out, and I think it was one of our greater episodes.
Oh, absolutely.
Because there's so much passion associated with it and so much humanity associated with it, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll tell you, you know, it looks like a real rhino. At no point would you think that that wasn't real.
Yeah.
That's
Breathing and
amazing.
snorting, and the ears moving and its head moving. Yeah. it's
Yeah.
just-
I saw a picture of the guy who was inside, like coming out the back of it. I'm like, that's still amazes me to this day. Every time I see the episode, because I'm looking at it, and at your 500th time through an episode, you go, can I see if it? No, it still looks exactly as real as it ever did.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you when you would start, say, a new season? I'm sure you had the meeting of what are we trying to do different this season than last season. For example, first season, obviously, you're finding your legs, and you know, MacGyver, I wouldn't say he had a swagger, but he was more antagonistic, I'd say, towards the bad guys. You know, he was never arrogant, but he was always kind of like poking them with a stick. And then, you know, third season, you have, I'm thinking of the actress's name, but of course I can't think, the one who was supposed to be his girlfriend.
Right.
Wow.
Who never came back.
Who never came back. But she got, you know, you could see where they're antagonistic. Was the initial idea to have her be the girlfriend? Was that because I'm thinking that was around the years of Moonlighting, and Moonlighting kind of set the pace for the will they, won't they?
I don't remember really the total, whether we were looking at other television shows.
Nikki Carpenter, that's her name. It was driving me nuts.
Nikki Carpenter, yeah. I think that what it was is, you know, you need to keep the series evolving, and you need to keep your character evolving. And so the Nikki Carpenter character was an attempt to give him a girlfriend and see where we take it. You know, you don't plan out a whole season for something like that.
Sure.
Like Penny Parker, you know, there was a good chemistry. Where can we take it? It's so natural, you just keep doing it. But with a girlfriend relationship, I'll tell you what really happened. People hated seeing MacGyver with a girlfriend.
Oh, yeah.
And we got a ton of mail saying so. They didn't like her.
Because
And
at first they're fighting, and then they
yeah,
kind of become friends with the Widowmaker.
right.
And then the last episode that she's in, as I recall, is the one with the hot air balloon.
Yeah.
And the Russian guy says, "You two will love each other." And I think that's when the audience went, "Nope."
I think so. Well, I think we learned a pretty good lesson with that character,
Yeah.
and we kind of never went back to that. But it was
Well, he did get a girlfriend in the 6th season,
well,
Maria Rumberg.
who?
Maria Rumberg from The Wall. The episode was called The Wall, and she was the German girl, the granddaughter. And then she's in the episode with him where he has the dream where he's in the Wild West again. It was
Okay.
MacGyver's women. Well, they have this conversation as they're walking in, and she wants him to commit more. He's like, "Yeah, I don't know how comfortable I am with relationships." And soon enough, you never saw her again.
Yeah, and you know that at the time that was pretty much Rick too.
Yeah. Oh, I know.
He had a big commitment problem.
Yeah. I know.
Yeah.
I'm like, there's not much that they wrote of MacGyver that wasn't Rick. Like you could tell the writers went, "We like him. Where's he from? Minnesota. All right, so's MacGyver. Has a commitment problem? So does MacGyver."
Yeah.
And it's great.
Yeah. We tried a lot of things that were his interests. We did that show on the ice with all of the
Oh, yeah.
visiting characters, Butkus and the comedian, what was his name?
Rich Little.
Rich Little. Yeah,
Mhm.
Rich Little. And
That was the 100th episode, wasn't it?
I
I
don't
believe
remember.
it was.
Yeah, I don't remember, but I do remember that Rick loved ice hockey.
Mhm.
And so MacGyver crew had an ice hockey team, and Michael Greenberg even played, and Rick loved to skate. And we were up in Vancouver, and like the only time they could get ice time for their little team and to do, and of course, I was the showrunner, and I didn't skate, but I had to go and cheer them on, be there for the team at 3:00 in the morning, ice time. When we had a call at 7 in the morning, these guys would be dripping wet, and you can't be on an ice hockey rink for 10 minutes without turning into a sweaty flood. But that was great stuff, and Rick did a lot of. He was an adventurous guy.
Oh yeah, I mean, I hear stories about him, skiing and doing like the jumping off cliffs with his skis and race car driving, which, as I recall, made everybody a nervous wreck.
Well, the race car driving, I didn't know he was doing it because actors have contracts that don't let them do that kind of stuff because they can get hurt and not be able to come to work, and so he was racing on weekends. I didn't know it.
Yeah.
And he had a crash. I think he rolled over or whatever. And I think the studio found out before I did. I don't remember exactly. I said, "Rick, what the hell's going on?" He's kind of sheepish. "Well, I like doing that."
Meanwhile, he's trying to do all his own stunts all the time too. So, it's great for the audience, but I wouldn't envy being in your position at that moment.
No, there were many times that we had to worry because if he's hurt, you're down.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're down, it's going to cost you $150,000 a day just to be down, So in those days, it's
wow.
But we made it, when we went to Vancouver. Of course, we're used to shooting in Southern California, where you never have rain. But we go to Vancouver, and you got rain. And so the crew, there's a lot of American influence with the crew, and they call up and say, "It's raining, we got to shut down." I said, "You're not shutting down.
Oh.
I said, make it work. We'll make it match because it was on and off rain.
Mm-hmm.
And then the snow was on and off.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you match a shot? You know, you shoot a master, then you do the close-ups. And
Sure.
so it got to the point where we routinely carried burlap bags full of dried potato flakes. And we would use the fans to blow the potato flakes to make snow, so we would match our shots. But by the time we were done, if it was raining or snowing, the ground was a mashed potato mess. But those are, you know, MacGyverisms to shoot MacGyver. Because, you know, you invent these kind of things. It was, and our crew was great with that stuff, you know, special effects guys.
Oh yeah, and the guys who would do like the Eye of Osiris episode with the temple, you know,
Right.
that's wow, that's amazing. You believe what you're seeing. If it's supposed to be 1,000 years old, there it is.
Yeah.
You know,
And the Rex Ragland was our designer up in Canada, and I remember when we wrote that show, because you're always behind the gun and you're handing them pages ahead of time so that they can. And I'll never forget the day I walked out of our offices and the stages were across, and he had about 20 art students that he'd recruited from the university out carving foam that they were spray painting to make all the monuments and whatnot on that temple. They're all out there carving. It's just amazing to see the work that these people can do and how quick. I wrote an episode, the Holy Rose episode.
Oh, that was you. That was
Yeah,
the
I wrote
two-parter.
that. And yeah, it was two-part. Part one was better than part two. Too rushed. But we were under the gun. And so as I'm writing the episode and inventing the artifacts that go into creating all the gags and whatnot, but they're using the artifacts with the things and whatnot, I wanted to be accurate. And so I'm having Rex in saying, I'm thinking of this, thinking of that. And he said, oh, there's this and this. And so he is designing the props and the sets as I'm writing the script. It was a great experience, though. Because it's a collaboration that kind of worked, you know.
Right.
Part one I thought was great. Part two kind of dribbled off into nowhere.
You think?
Yeah, I do.
Well, I'll tell you, you know, for me, the highlight of that whole thing is when he gets strapped to the sarcophagus and the blade, because it felt like the stakes got ramped up because he was never bound before. Like all the other times he's free to think something up and grab stuff. But what do you do when you can't move? You know, and here's the clock ticking down. Here comes the it's, you know, that happened on that one. And then in the episode, The Hood, where when you guys move back to LA and he gets his apartment, he gets strapped to a thing too. And the thing's going to fall on him. Those episodes, I always felt the stakes were raised more than ever. And that was exciting because, you know, you're tying them up.
I recall the solution to that guillotine was some hair in the water jar, wasn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
I forget now how we got it there, but
He had to kick his shoe off, hit the one wood thing. It made the head roll into the jar and then
right.
log it up.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, that was an all-nighter too.
Yeah. Oh, I can imagine. So, you know, in the second half, well, he has to rescue the girl and find the prize, you know. So, you know, I can at least tell you from an audience's perspective, I don't think any of us have ever said, oh, part two is not as good as, I think it's all, you know, it's all one story.
Part of the whole, yeah.
Yeah. So,
well, I'm glad to hear that.
Well, and that's the thing too. I really want you to know in case nobody's told you lately, the minutia that you stuck with, whether it was the music, the pacing, all the little details, it's noticed and it's appreciated more than I can say, because for me as a writer and all the other things that I do, it's because of what you did that has affected my life. And hopefully I'm carrying on that legacy to some degree.
Well, thank you.
You're
You know, a good story about the music is in the first 2 years, of course, we were in Los Angeles, and we had a great composer and just a terrific guy to work with. And we always had studio musicians rather than digital music. But digital music was coming in. But we always had 60 pieces to do the music for the show. And when we went to Vancouver, it just didn't work to have the music done in Los Angeles, and I couldn't be there for the reviews.
Sure.
But it could work for me to spot with the composer over the phone and let him write the music, and then bring him to Vancouver. But there were no studio musicians in those days in Vancouver. And so the studio was saying, go digital. And I didn't want to do that. And I said, I've been to the Vancouver Symphony, and there's a lot of good musicians there. And I think we could find a stage to put them in. And I think our composer could make it work. And so the studio okayed that. And so we were the first show that scored music with real musicians on a television show in Vancouver. And we drew from the Vancouver Symphony.
Wow.
And we created new employment for those guys, and we kept, and everybody said, oh, well, they're not studio musicians.
Right.
And I said, they're musicians. And if my composer thinks he can work with them, then we should agree to give it a shot. And the studio went along, and we did it, and it worked. And so all of our episodes up there were with instruments.
And it makes a difference too.
Makes a huge difference. Later on, I did a show called RoboCop.
Sure.
In Toronto, and the budget was such they couldn't use studio musicians. We had to do digital stuff. And I had a great guy doing that, but what we always did is when he took his digital library and put it together or wrote it digitally and created his tracks, we always saved enough money on the episodes for him to hire 3 or 4 musicians just to add to his tracks to give a real sound to it. And it helped, but it never was a 60-piece orchestra, you know?
Sure. Well, here's a question. A couple things. When you moved to Vancouver, that was for scenery, right? That was your motivation, say?
Well, 2 things. I had never been to Vancouver. I was having a problem with the first 2 years because MacGyver is an international show. And in the Los Angeles area, how do you make it international? You've got to travel. Well, there's a thing in the union regulations that if your location is within 20-mile circumference, a zone, 20-mile zone of the studio, you can have the crew report to location, and that's when the clock starts running. If it's outside of that 20-mile zone, the crew reports to the studio, the clock starts, you bus them, and then they get out there and do all that. It's very expensive.
Yeah.
So it got more and more difficult to find locations that work for our show in the Los Angeles area. I knew nothing about Vancouver. We were just sweating through it, and we were doing a lot of stuff out on the north side of LA, trying to stay in the zone as much as we could. But the studio said, Paramount Studios owned a string of theaters in Canada. And so they had money in the bank in Canada, but also the dollar rate for union crew was about the same as in Canada as the US, but at the time the exchange rate was 30%, 70 cents on the dollar. So the studio said, to save money, would you take the show to Vancouver or to Canada?
Sure.
And I said, yeah, I've never been there, and I don't know if I can make it work or whatnot. So I said, let's go up there and take a look. And so we go up, and I'll never forget coming into Vancouver from the airport. It's a beautiful, beautiful day, but it's cold as hell. And we're going down the street, and all these Canadians are with their shirts out, laying on the lawn and whatnot. And I realized that they don't get that sun too much. But anyway, they had a film commission up there that took us around. And what I came to realize is that what I came to realize is that we have a urban area in terms of Vancouver, but you go this way and you have farmland. You go this way, you have mountains. You go this way, you have desert, streams, rushing water, the Widowmaker, and all of it's in the 20-mile zone.
Wow.
All of it. And then there was the studio. This was I think it's called now the Bridge Studios.
Bridge Studios, yeah.
And it was the place that fabricated the Golden Gate Bridge and Lionsgate Bridge. And there was a number of buildings, one huge building. We turned that into our special effects stage. It was about 100 yards long. And then on the face of that building, we built our offices and our editing suites. And then across the street, there were 3 other buildings that we turned into smaller sound stages so we could rotate our set building. And then there was a lot of property around there. Well, at Paramount, you have a budget for every show. At Paramount, you're on the sound stage, you're paying so much to the studio for that sound stage. But if we walk off the sound stage just outside the door to shoot one of those inserts so we can be in daylight,
Sure.
I get a $3,000 bill.
Oh, sheesh.
Up there in Canada, we had the whole place. We had the sound stages, the offices, the editorial suites, everything, and we had the outside. I throw up sets on the outside, and we stay on the lot, and I never got charged for nothing out there. You know,
that's great. That's a great decision.
It was great. So we had that, and we had the 20-mile zone that let us be on Grouse Mountain skiing, or out in the Okanagan Valley in a farm, or on a rushing river, or up in the Widowmaker. And so it made it more cost effective, both in terms of the exchange rate, but even more so in terms of the locations that that allowed us to keep an international show. And then when we took the show up there, we were the first primetime American series to shoot in Canada. MacGyver was. And the Canadians could only, at the time, put together, and they shot movies up there,
Sure.
and maybe even some television movies, but not a series. But the town could only put together, I think at the time, 2 or 3 crews. And by the time we left, after 4 years, they could put together, I think, about 11 crews. And in LA, like if a focus puller wanted to progress up to a camera operator, in LA, it took them probably 8 years.
Wow.
And in Canada, when we're doing this, they're making it in 3 months or 8 months, you know. So because other shows started to come up and whatnot, and they had to mount crews, and so they did a great job. But it was interesting too that there's a different, I found a different work ethic, where in LA everybody is chasing the rainbow or the job all the time. Boom, 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 gotta work, gotta do this, gotta do this. Everything is about the career and whatnot, and long hours. Well, in Canada, we put together a crew that probably hadn't worked in a while.
Sure.
And so we're thinking, oh, well, these guys are probably grateful to have a job, you know? Well, we're not 4 months into shooting, and we have a couple of key people saying, I got to take some time off, got to take the family camping and whatnot. And I'm like, what are you talking about? It is, you know, even though they speak English, and it's our next door neighbor, culturally, it's a different thing, and happily so. I think Canadians are more contented people than Americans that always got to achieve this and achieve that. The Canadians, there's a lot of relationship, there's a lot of concern for family and doing things with family and camping and fishing and all that. And they're not always going to let work get in the way of that. You know?
That's a good thing. I love that.
Yeah, it's refreshing. It's very refreshing. Yeah.
I bet you ending those opening gambits during the first season must have been a major relief.
Well, we had to. They were hugely expensive.
Yeah, it's only 5 minutes an episode, but boy, you'd have to be, you know, wherever to do them.
Oh yeah, I mean, we're traveling off to Pismo Beach so we can put a horse in the sand so we can get lifted off with a horse and all onto a helicopter. But not only all of that, to shoot it, we had to train the damn horse for 3 months. You know? Well, I'm exaggerating.
No, but still.
The horse had to be trained to withstand that kind of thing. So it requires the horse, and it requires somebody to ride the horse, and it requires the gear that's going to lift him off, and practicing lifting him off with that helicopter. That was
a heck of a stunt.
Yeah, those were great to do, but they were horribly expensive, and we just had to lose them. And really, all they were a interstitial. A lot of times they didn't even connect to the story.
No, not at all. It was just more of a, hey, here's what you're in for if you stay watching the episode.
Yeah.
Thing. With the theme song, was it your idea to each season update it? Because I'll tell you, each season, you know, got a little more emphasis on different, you know, aspects of it. Like, for example, during the 6th season, there's that big wah that happens right before it. Bum, bum, you know, was that your doing? Did you have a say in changing it?
I'm sure I had a say in it. I think it was just a matter of each season. We don't want to forget what that theme song is. Mm-hmm. It's a signature theme song. We don't want to lose it, but we want to update it.
Which was great.
And so that when you come on, you got a fresh show, but you got a familiar show. You're still branding the same way you branded before, but there's something there's something new that makes you smile. So we have those kinds of discussions. And then the composer, our composer was just a terrific, great guy.
Without a doubt.
I was always amazed. We would go into a scoring session, where you have your orchestra, you have the episode. It's going to run to picture. So he's composing. He's directing his composition to picture, and so we can sit there. And I would say, I use the phrase bump. I would bump on something where a particular bar or passage of music didn't resonate with what my vision of the scene was. And so I'd say to him, that just kind of doesn't work for me. What I was thinking that it would be more so-and-so. And he'd go like this, and he'd go up back to his stand, and he'd look at his score, and then he'd go, horns, give me a tut-tut-tut, flutes, give me a tut-tut-tut, and strings, give me this at this. And these musicians are so darn good, and he's so darn good. He goes, okay, 3, 2, 1. And they did it. They did it. And here I just said, kind of doesn't work for me. Could we have, and it's just, musicians are to be envied. I mean, the music man's mind, and it was always astonishing to me what they could accomplish just like that. And always so willing to listen and execute. But you would think that when you give him a note like that, okay, we're in for an hour of, rewriting the score and doing the boom, boom. He's got it. And I never went through that without being amazed at the skill of musicians. Never.
Oh, yeah. And that's all that whole, collaboration thing where it's not about ego, it's about the product.
Yeah. Right.
I know a lot of people have asked, I don't know if you were ever asked, when during the later seasons, when you'd say you'd have to refilm the beginning credits to update his look, like his hair got longer, he got older, so you got to redo it. There are certain scenes that weren't even in an episode that were refilmed, to update it. Like some are from episodes, like him eating ice cream, him slipping through the gates. There's one where the cobra comes up and he reacts. They're iconic scenes during the beginning credits that were updated. And I always wondered, as apparently other people did too, whose idea was it to reshoot them as opposed to just grabbing new random, because a lot of shows will just go, just use this from the newer episodes. You know what I mean?
I don't think that we ever reshot. I don't think we ever shot anything for the main titles.
Well, no, there's 3 scenes in particular that I'm thinking of.
Okay, but what I'm saying is, I don't think that we ever shot film specifically.
Oh, I
the
got
main
you.
Titles. We always took our main title film from something that we've already shot.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we might have taken it from something that was cut out of an episode.
Yeah.
And used it in the main titles.
That makes sense.
Because it was a good piece,
Yeah.
But as I recall, we never said, let's go out and shoot this and this for main titles.
Okay.
Now we would do effects for the main titles, but effects with the film that we had.
Sure. Oh, okay. Yeah, because people were wondering, because there are just, the classic images that,
Right.
You'd see updated. You go, oh, okay, that's neat. And I always appreciated that.
Yeah.
Because it'd probably be easier just to grab newer stuff. You know what I mean?
Or stuff that was on the floor from something else.
Yeah, which is, I love that idea too.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, makes it, because in your head you're going, wait, he's wearing that, so that was probably from that episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Talking about that, one of the things that always amazed me is probably stuff that amazes me that I don't remember. But when we were in Vancouver, of course, my wife went with me, and we made just to be a part of the community and a little outreach. We associated with the Make-A-Wish Foundation. So little children that wanted to meet MacGyver would get to come, and they'd fly them in from all over the place. And my wife would spend the day with the child and their family and tour them during the at our studio and take them to the set, meet with Rick. And Rick always, when we had a wish child, he would always have lunch with them and take some pictures and whatnot. But on these tours, like when they go through the wardrobe department, racks and racks and racks of wardrobe, these kids and their families would look at a piece of wardrobe. Oh, so-and-so wore that in so-and-so an episode.
Yep.
So when you call me, I'm saying, well, I hope this guy is not going to ask me all these.
No.
Because you probably know more about the show than I do.
Yeah.
about a lot of the details.
Oh yeah, my family goes, you know, because I could spot any actor or any location, and I go, oh, that was used on such and such a show, and they'll just go, of course you do.
Yeah.
Wow, that's neat. Yeah, well, because you know, it's the subtleties that end up meaning so much. It's, you know, when I always say when I was a kid, I always wanted a leather jacket because the Fonz had a leather jacket. But then as you get older, and say with MacGyver, it's not the wardrobe that makes the hero, it's the hero that makes the wardrobe.
Right.
Right? I mean, you know, you could put on Indiana Jones's hat, it doesn't mean that have the same attributes.
You're right.
Oh.
And Rick was he was the chooser of his wardrobe.
Yeah.
He had to be comfortable. He had to feel like it was him, and that's why it was always him. You know.
Well, his original leather jacket.
Like the mustache.
Well, his original leather jacket, that was his because he, I guess, wore that to the audition, and there's photographs from maybe 3 years before MacGyver of him in that jacket. You know,
Really?
so
Right.
yeah. And then like the blue or black flight jacket, that was his because I'd see it in something later on.
Well, here's an interesting story. I wasn't there for it, but Henry and John always told me the story of why they cast Richard Dean Anderson to be MacGyver. Because they had a feel for what this character should be.
Yeah.
And when Rick came in to audition for the pilot, Henry always tells the story, especially, he said, I knew he was the guy. When he opened the script and looked at us, he said, do you mind if I put on my glasses? He says, that's MacGyver. He's humble and he's just real. Do you mind if I put on my glasses? He said, the way he said it and the fact that he wanted to do it and he wasn't bothered by it, that's our guy.
That's great.
Henry, it was a great story.
I remember Henry saying too that when they were doing the auditions, it would be a bunch of big bodybuilder Italian guys that would be sitting for their next, you know, chance to walk in and shock them and like, look, I'm the 80s hero guy.
Right.
And MacGyver is the opposite.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
That's a
It's
great
the opposite.
story.
Yeah.
Well,
Loved it.
listen, I could listen to you forever, and I'm sure there's going to be time down the road where I'm going to ask you things through email or social media, but I don't want to be too greedy. I'll let you go. But like I said, I may bug you in the future if that's okay with you.
Not a problem, anytime.
I love that.
Hey, this is a lot of fun. Brought back, you stimulated a lot of memories.
Oh, good. Well, you know, like I said, I love hearing your stories, and I love getting a chance to express how much the show and your contribution has meant to me in my life personally. It's an ongoing, lit fuse, I guess. So
Nice of you to say so.
you're
Yeah.
very welcome. And it's
It
great
was a great experience in my life as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I'll be in touch. As soon as this is done, I'll send it your way. And and I love before I forget, I love all the little pictures and stuff you've been adding to Facebook.
Oh, yeah, they were kind of fun, weren't they?
It is fun, yeah.
The guessing game, yes. Yeah.
Because I'm there, I'm looking at him, I go, oh, I know him. Oh, I know when that was shot. And then I'd like wait to read underneath to see how long it takes other people to figure it out.
Yeah.
So thank you for, constantly adding to Facebook too.
You're welcome.
I will talk to you later.
Okay, sir.
And thank you again.
You're very welcome.
You have a great night.
You too. Thanks.
Bye. The MacGyver podcast is part of the Forever Adventure Network. Some original artwork by Joseph Arnold. Donations can be made at Patreon to Mac Jackson. Look for our group pages on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at MacGyver Podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review. And remember, stay creative, everyone. The Forever Adventure Network. Welcome to the adventure.